his slumped gait and dragging feet, which suggested that he was carrying the weight of his entire life on his back, were how I recognized him. I never thought I would see the man who used to be my husband like this again, searching through shattered cans and ripped bags in order to survive. He was leaning over a dumpster, sorting scraps with filthy hands, and putting the aluminum cans in an old sack. As I was leaving the bank with a folder under my arm, my heart stopped. That corner of the street appeared to make the entire globe smaller. It was him, the man who had previously shared my bed, my table, and my fantasies. Even if he was undernourished, had an overgrown beard, matted white hair, and stained clothes, I was unable to move, standing motionless on the pavement. I recalled the day he left home with just a chilly letter and no clear reason. It's best that way. For years, I was internally devastated by that abandonment. I went from anger to disdain, and then from disdain to a persistent grief. And now, after all this time, life was presenting him to me, in this manner, reduced to a can collector who was invisible to everyone. I was embarrassed by my own ideas. In order to avoid being noticed and to avoid connecting that suffering with my past, a part of me wished to cross the street, but I was driven to approach by something more powerful than pride. I took one step, then another. He instinctively looked up as my heels clicked on the pavement. Our gazes locked. He briefly recognized me. Then his face flashed with the jolt of remembering. His hands shook. He made an attempt to get away from me as though I were a ghost, seeking to collect an outstanding debt. With a voice that didn't sound like mine, I said, "Is that you?" He looked down in embarrassment. "This is not how you should see me," he continued. "Ignore it, proceed. But before we go any further, I would want to give you a very unique invitation. Please like and subscribe to the channel. I can see that you like my stories and support me thanks to this. And let us know in the comments below the city you are currently viewing us from. Let's go on." I didn't continue on my path. My heart was racing as I stood in front of him. I examined him carefully, noting the ripped shoes, the cold cracked fingers, and the sunken eyes from hunger. This man had nothing in common with the respected engineer I knew, the one who spoke passionately about construction projects and wore well-fitting suits. I could no longer conceal my trembling and demanded, "Tell me, why are you living like this? I must know after everything that transpired." He looked around as if he thought someone may be listening, his lips squeezed together. Then he slowly shook his head. "You should never have seen me again," he said in a low voice. I moved in closer, saying, "I did everything so you wouldn't have to carry this." I could smell the streets, the poverty, and the stale sweat. My question was, with what? When he looked up and said, "With what did you do all this, Thaddeus?" With tears in his eyes, I was torn in two. "It was done to keep you safe." I had the impression that my breath was running out. My legs became weak. To keep him from falling, I took hold of his arm. "What can you save me from?" Almost pleading, I said. That made an effort to remain upright, but his body stopped reacting. He passed out in my arms and fell to the filthy pavement like a fallen tree. I cried out for assistance. A couple of onlookers came over. We made an ambulance call. I knelt next to him and held his head in my lap while we waited, just like I used to do when he was ill when we were younger. I never imagined that I would hold him in this manner once more. Weak and defeated, the paramedic in the ambulance reported that he had evidence of chronic malnutrition, severe anemia, and dehydration. Those words were so difficult for me to comprehend. That sentence and his pallid face were all I could see. "It was done to keep you safe." He received treatment in the emergency department of the hospital. They told me that he has been spotted sleeping in temporary shelters and denying assistance without identification on multiple occasions. Hours later, I was still there when he woke up. He said, "Leave," as soon as his eyes opened. "My worry doesn't belong to you anymore." "You never stopped belonging to me as part of my history," I replied, "and I'm not leaving until you tell me the truth." He closed his eyes, seeming to debate internally. Finally, with a broken voice, he murmured, "I didn't go broke because of terrible judgments. Because I obeyed, I went bankrupt." "Obey who?" I asked. He didn't answer. He turned his head toward the wall. His silence was harder than any confession. That night, I slept sitting next to his gurney, still not understanding the magnitude of what I was about to discover. I thought about our marriage, the unexplained arguments, his sudden flight, the legal papers that arrived afterward like a dry blow, the ruin that I also lived through when he left me alone with debts. I never understood. At dawn, when he opened his eyes again, he looked at me with deep sadness. "Everything I lost, I lost so that you would stay alive," he said. "And even so, you hated me." I felt a terrible knot in my throat. "I didn't know anything," I replied. "I thought you had betrayed me." A tear slid down his dirty cheek. "That was what I needed you to believe." In that instant, I knew I had lived deceived for years, that my resentment had been built on a carefully designed lie, and I understood that the misery he was living in wasn't the result of chance, but of a hidden sacrifice. I didn't yet know who was behind it all. I didn't know what real danger had stalked me back then, but something inside me ignited with force the need to get to the bottom of that truth. I slowly caressed his hand. "Rest," I told him. "This time you are not alone." As I watched him close his eyes again under the harsh white hospital light, I understood that this reunion among trash and cans hadn't been a coincidence. It had been the beginning of a truth capable of destroying many lives and changing mine forever. That slept almost all the next day, sedated by painkillers and exhausted by years of neglect. I stayed by his side without knowing exactly why, only with the certainty that if I left, something important would be lost in the shadows again. As I watched him breathe with difficulty, memories began to parade through my mind without permission, like a river breaking old levees. I met him when I was 28. He was a man full of plans, big words, strong hands. He worked day and night and yet always found time to look at me as if I were his greatest achievement. He promised me a stable future, a house of our own, trips, peace of mind, and for many years he delivered. We weren't rich, but we were happy, in our own way. I swed, managed the house, made every dollar stretch. He built, he fixed, he dreamed. Our marriage wasn't perfect. We had arguments, long silences, small wounds that never quite finished healing, but I never imagined the end would come as it did. Cold, without shouting, without explanations, without a single word that would allow me to understand it. One morning, he simply didn't come back from work. 2 days passed without news. I went to the precinct, the hospitals, his office. Nobody knew anything. On the third day, a lawyer appeared at my house with a sealed envelope. Inside was a brief letter written in his handwriting. "Forgive me. It's for the best. Don't try to look for me anymore." That was the day my world started to break on the inside. For weeks, I called him relentlessly. I wrote to him. His numbers ceased to exist. Nobody answered me. And little by little, the final blows arrived. Debts I didn't know about, empty accounts, foreclosed properties. The legal papers appeared one after another like poisonous rain. In less than 6 months, I had lost everything. My husband, my stability, my home. I was forced to move into a small room and start over at 47 years old. Many looked at me with pity, others with suspicion. Some even blamed me for his abandonment. "You must have done something," they said. I let them talk because I didn't even understand myself. For years, I hated him. I hated him for leaving without explanations, for leaving me alone with the shame, with the creditors, with the memories. I hated him for not fighting, for not showing his face, for disappearing as if our life together had been a mistake that needed to be erased. That night, sitting next to his hospital bed, that hate began to crack for the first time. When he woke up again, I asked the nurses to leave us alone. I closed the door carefully. Thaddeus looked at me with exhaustion. His eyes were no longer the ones from before. They were broken by something deeper than poverty. "Tell me everything," I told him bluntly. "Don't lie to me anymore. It makes no sense today." He kept silent for a long time. His breathing was heavy. Finally, he spoke. "The day I disappeared, that same day, I was supposed to die." I felt like my chest was exploding. "How can you say that?" I whispered. "Because that was what I was ordered to do," he replied, "and I chose something else." I looked at him without understanding. "Who gave you that order?" He swallowed hard. "Dangerous people, very, very dangerous people." Everything in his face was truth. Not the truth that screams, but the kind that weighs heavy. "I was accused of fraud I didn't commit," he continued. "A project where I only signed documents they forced me to sign. When I wanted to report it, they showed me false evidence, bought witnesses, and a photograph of you coming out of our building." I felt a chill. "They told me that if I spoke, if I tried to clear my name, you would pay the price." The words went through me like knives. "And that's why you ran. All these years, everything I suffered was to protect me." I asked. "To save your life," he replied. I covered my mouth with my hand. I felt 40 years of resentment crumble all at once, leaving only a painful void. "And why didn't you ever come back?" I asked in a thin voice. "I didn't run," he replied bitterly. "I erased myself. You had to hate me, he said. It was the only way you wouldn't suspect anything. I whispered. Because they kept watching, he said. Every time I tried to get close, someone reminded me that you were still alive only because I was complying. I understood then his misery, not as a consequence, but as an imposed condition. That night, I didn't sleep. I walked through the hospital corridors aimlessly, my mind full of new images, rewriting my entire history. My hate, my abandonment, my ruin, it had all been part of the same operation of control. The next morning, I returned to his bed with a different determination. You know, I can't unhear this now, I told him. I'm not the scared woman I was before. He looked at me with worry. Don't dig up the past, he begged. The past kills. Silence does too, I replied. And I've kept silent for too many years. He tried to sit up. If you talk, they will come. Let them come, I said without trembling. This time, you won't be alone. For the first time in a long time, I saw fear in his eyes. Not for him. For me. You don't know who you're messing with, he murmured. You didn't know how many years of life you were stealing from me with your silence either, I replied. He pressed his lips together, crying without making a sound. That same day, strange people began to appear at the hospital. Men who didn't look like anyone's family. They asked about beds that didn't exist. They watched from afar. Thaddeus grabbed my hand in desperation. They've already started, he whispered. I looked at him with the calm of someone who has already lost too much to back down. Then the end of this story has already started, too, because I was prepared to become the lady who would bring him back to life and hold those responsible for his destruction accountable. If he had become a ghost in order to save me, I no longer felt at ease in the hospital's shadows. There was an unsolved question in every hallway. Every unknown has the potential to be dangerous. Thaddeus's confession had permanently altered my world. I was no longer just the miserable woman who had gotten back together with her ex. I was now a character in a tale of terror, unseen men, and silences purchased with destruction. I returned to the waiting area that evening with a scorching head as he slept. I reflected on everything I had gone through since his disappearance, including the bills that overwhelmed me, the humiliation of seeking assistance, and the looks I received from people who assumed I had been abandoned because of my own actions. Now, each recollection took on a new, sinister hue. I was the only one who was unaware that it had all been a stage play to keep me safe. I returned to his room around morning. Thaddeus struggled to his feet. I got some water for him. He gave me a look that suggested he was afraid I had left, as though his honesty had frightened me away. I informed him I was still here. With relief, he nodded. It was me who finally broke the ice after we had been silent for a few seconds. I said, I want the names. It is no longer sufficient to comprehend the past. I said, mine was already in danger without me knowing it. You won't have to carry this alone again, he said, taking a deep breath. It all started with a big project, he said, a multi-million-dollar public works contract. He closed his eyes and tightly gripped the sheet. Not all names are said out loud, he replied. Some are pronounced only once and then cost you your life. All I did was serve as the technical lead. However, the contracts were rife with fraudulent invoices, ghost firms, and money diversion. I felt compelled to report it when I found it. His voice cracked. I got the first threat that same evening. He clarified that first. He believed he might avoid it by making a payment, quitting, or going missing. However, they never desired his stillness alone. They were looking for an offender. They desired a tidy moniker to use for everything. And he was ideal because of his position and impeccable record. He went on after they understood I wouldn't back down. You were brought to the table by them. My stomach began to tighten. He said, they showed me pictures of you coming into and going out of our building. Routes, schedules, and locations where you were by yourself. They warned me that anything could go wrong. I raised my hand to my chest. I recalled a few days when I sensed someone was following me aimlessly. I never thought it was true. I accepted then, he muttered. Everything was autographed by me. I turned everything over. I didn't say goodbye. In order for them to know that the blackmail was successful, you had to despise me in order to avoid trying to locate me. Silently, I sobbed. And everything we lost to them? I inquired. It was part of the price, he said, referring to the house and the accounts. It had to appear as though my own errors had cost me everything. I responded angrily, and you really lost it. He nodded. Indeed, because the monster is never pleased when it realizes it can take. He started to add something further. but he had to stop himself due to a coughing episode. I gave the nurse a call. I caught a glimpse of a man observing the hallway from the rear while she was tending to him, too alert to be a concerned family member. He instantly turned his face away and left when our eyes locked. Like a chill wave, the fear came back. A doctor came to talk to me privately that same afternoon. He clarified that Thaddeus's condition was serious but stable, and that further testing was necessary. He lowered his voice before he left. "Be careful with the visitors," he warned me. "Today, 3 people asked for him who don't seem to be from his circle." I felt my knees go weak. I returned to his room with a decision already formed in my chest. "I can't keep listening to you halfway," I told him. "If you're going to talk now. We don't know how much time we have." He looked at me with pain. "There is something I never told you," he said. "That night, before disappearing, I left a box buried under the old workshop where I used to work. Nobody else knows about it. Inside are the originals of the documents that prove all the embezzlement." My heart jumped. "Why didn't you use them?" "Because then you would have died," he replied. "But now that they know I've surfaced, maybe it makes no sense to keep quiet anymore." We looked at each other for a long time. I understood that his silence hadn't only protected me. It had also protected many others who lived unaware of that network of corruption. "I want to go for that box," I told him. "No," he replied sharply. "It's dangerous." "It's more dangerous to sit still waiting," I answered. "You already sacrificed your life for me once. I won't let you do it again." He kept silent. Finally, he nodded with resignation. "In the back of the shop, behind a false shelf," he said. "Everything is there." That night, I barely slept. Every shadow in the hallways seemed like a threat, every sound a warning. The next morning, I left the hospital with my heart in a fist. I took a taxi and headed to the old workshop on the south side, now converted into an almost abandoned warehouse. The place smelled of old oil and dust. I walked with slow steps, holding my breath. I found the shelf, moved boxes, touched the wall, until I found an irregular gap. I dug with a rusty tool that was there. My hands were shaking when I touched the buried metal box. I pulled it out with effort. It was heavy. I opened it with the key Thaddeus had described to me with words. Inside were sealed folders, thumb drives, contracts with real signatures, photos, recordings, enough evidence to take down more than one powerful name. I felt a mixture of terror and determination. It wasn't enough to know the truth. Now I held it in my hands. Leaving the workshop, I saw a car parked half a block away that started its engine immediately. I walked without looking back to a corner full of people and went into a store. I waited, watched. The car circled, and finally disappeared. The game was no longer secret. I returned to the hospital with the box inside a regular shopping bag. Thaddeus was waiting for me awake. When he saw my eyes, he understood I had done it. I didn't say anything, just nodded. "Now, they're not just chasing you and me," he said with sadness. "Now they're chasing the truth." "Let them try," I replied. "This time, I don't plan to hide it." In that instant, I knew I had crossed an invisible border. I was no longer just the woman who cried, finding her ex-husband collecting cans. Now, I was the guardian of a truth capable of destroying empires, and those who had played with our lives for years were no longer the only ones who knew their secrets. I returned to the hospital with the metal box pressed against my chest, as if I were carrying someone alive inside. Every step weighed on me, not just from the fear of being followed, but from everything that box represented. Decades of lies, injustice, a life destroyed without me ever understanding why. When I entered Thaddeus's room again, he looked at me the way one looks at someone returning from a war. "I found it," I said barely, placing the bag under the bed. His eyes filled with tears. He closed his eyelids for a few seconds as if praising God in silence. "Then, there is no turning back." "There never was," I replied. I sat next to the gurney. For hours, we didn't open the box. We stayed in silence, listening to the sounds of the hospital, as if we needed to gather strength to face what was coming. Finally, with trembling hands, I opened it. Inside were folders labeled by years, dates, stamps, names I didn't know, but Thaddeus did. Photographs of construction sites, maps, payment lists, and also my own accounts, my properties, my forged signatures. I saw documents where I appeared as a debtor of impossible sums, contracts where my name was linked to shell companies I had never heard of. Everything was made so that if one day they investigated me, it would look like I was the guilty one. I felt a dizziness so strong I had to close my eyes. "All this fell on me after you left," I whispered. The debts, the seizures. I thought it was bad luck because of your abandonment. It wasn't abandonment, he said with a broken voice. It was a sacrifice. And even so, it wasn't enough to protect you completely. The images began to unleash buried memories. The day I was evicted from the house without them looking me in the eye. The court notice that left me without savings. The humiliation of borrowing money from relatives who used to admire me. The sleepless nights wondering how to pay a debt I hadn't contracted. The years I became a burden to everyone. I cleaned houses, I said with my throat burning. In my 50s, I went hungry. I slept on borrowed sofas. And meanwhile, they were using my name to launder money. I squeezed a document between my fingers. Why didn't you warn me, Thaddeus? I asked, crying. Even if they had killed me, at least I would have died knowing the truth. No, he responded with desperation. Because I still had one chip to negotiate for your life. You didn't know, but every time someone doubted my silence, I showed a photo of you as a reminder of why I was still obeying. My tears fell onto the papers. So my misery was also part of the theater. I said, yes. He nodded. So it would look like you and I were totally destroyed, so no one would look further. For days I went back mentally to each of the losses I had lived. Nothing had been chance. Nothing had been bad luck. I had been carefully pushed to the edge of the abyss. So the weight of guilt would fall on a man, and in passing on his wife dragged down by ruin, I walked out of the room stumbling. I sat alone on a bench in the hallway. I looked at my aged hands, stained by life, by the hard work I never understood why I had to do. Now the answer was there. Someone had decided I had to fall to save a ring of criminals. That night, I couldn't go back to sleep. I opened the box alone, in a small room where no one entered. I read the documents one by one. I followed the dates. I discovered names I had heard on the news. Surnames linked to big corporations, to politicians, to respectable men. I, without knowing it, had been used as a screen for a gigantic corruption network. And they hadn't just stolen Thaddeus's life, they had stolen mine, too. At dawn, I went back to his room. I know everything I lost, I told him. Now, I want to know who took it from me. He pressed his lips together. If we go to the end, there will be no forgiveness, he said. Only judicial blood. Many will fall. I don't want blind revenge, I replied. I want justice with names and surnames. He looked at me with a mix of pride and fear. That justice kills slowly. I died slowly for years, too, I said without trembling. Now it's their turn to fall without masks. From that day on, I stopped being just a woman, wounded by the past. I began to secretly call the same people who had previously closed doors on me. Banks, courts, old partners. I used the documents in the box as a key, where before they denied me entry, now they listened in silence. I saw how the gears began to move. Some told me it was impossible, others that it was too late, a few that it was dangerous. I know, I always replied, but danger chased me all my life without me choosing it. Now I choose it. That got worse during those days. His body could no longer resist the burden of so many years of neglect. I watched him sleep and thought that perhaps he wouldn't live to see the end of it all. And that idea squeezed my soul. One afternoon, with a weak voice, he took my hand. If I don't get to see them fall, he whispered, promise me you won't stop. I promise, I replied with tears. This time, no one will silence us again. Outside the hospital, new faces began to appear. Men in suits, dark sedans, voiceless calls, veiled warnings. I knew the pieces on the other side of the board were moving to, but I wasn't alone anymore. I wasn't the deceived woman from the past. Now, I was the woman who had discovered why her life had been stolen. And when a woman understands why she fell, she becomes much more dangerous than before she fell because she no longer fights just to survive. She fights to recover every year they took from her. And I had just begun. The hospital room was in semi-darkness when I returned after another day of calls, appointments, and uncomfortable silences that slept restlessly. His chest rose and fell with difficulty, as if every breath dragged an invisible weight. I sat next to him with the metal box still resonating in my memory. Outside, the night seemed too quiet for everything that was about to explode. When he opened his eyes, he looked at me with a mix of gratitude and guilt. They've started moving, haven't they? He whispered. Yes, I replied. They know someone has the documents. He closed his eyes wearily. Then there is no easy way out of this. There never was, I told him. But now, for the first time, it's not just you against them. We kept silent for a few seconds. Then I leaned a little toward him. There is something else you haven't told me, Thaddeus. I know, I see it in your look, and I need it all now." His face hardened. For the first time since I had reunited with him, I saw true terror in his eyes. "That is the only thing I should never have told you," he murmured, "because when you know, there will be no turning back for you." "There is no turning back for me since I saw you collecting cans," I replied. "Speak." He took long seconds to do it. Finally, with a broken voice, he let out the sentence that froze me to the bone. "If I talk, if I say the full names, they kill you." I felt a sharp blow to the stomach. "Just like that," I whispered. "Just like that," he confirmed. "They aren't just corrupt businessmen. There are state employees, government representatives, bought judges, those who erase files, and others." I felt a chill go down my back. I realized that this was more significant than I had thought. Money wasn't the only factor. Raw power was the focus. He went on. "That's why I agreed to fall. I realized I wasn't bargaining my life when they placed your picture on the table and said everything might appear to be a robbery or an accident. I was haggling over yours." I started crying. I remarked, "And I hated you for years. I buried you alive in my heart." "That was what kept me alive," he retorted, "understanding that you were safe as long as you detested me." I put my hands over my face. Blows inside me were rewriting the past. Now, every anger-filled memory was being transformed into a perverse, agonizing, and severe gesture of love. "I insisted that you tell me the names, even if tomorrow I am killed." He gave a headshake. "We must first protect the evidence. Having the box is insufficient. They are able to create accidents, assaults, fires, and erase traces. We must expose the truth in a way that they cannot hide." How? With the media, with impartial prosecutors, and, if needed, with foreign witnesses. I inhaled deeply. I realized that this was more than a family tragedy. It was a battle against a decaying building. I answered, "Then tell me about them." Even without names yet, Thaddeus closed his eyes and started narrating in bits and pieces about a group of businesses, manipulated bids, millions of dollars worth of diversions, unfinished projects, officials who signed documents in return for envelopes, and attorneys tasked with silencing anyone who objected. He told me about an engineer who ran away after being falsely accused, and about an accountant who seemed to have committed suicide, about a councilman who allegedly perished in a house accident. "Like me," he muttered, "they all knew too much. I had been the negotiating chip without realizing it." I had a knot in my chest when I left the hospital that evening. I strolled along the pavement, viewing every stranger as a potential adversary. I experienced physical, not just mental, fear for the first time. Nevertheless, I continued. The following day, I started to carefully pull ropes with the assistance of an elderly journalist who had previously looked into significant instances. I simply showed him a small portion of the paperwork so he could understand how significant and real this was. He informed me that multiple people would seek your head if this were the case. I said, "They wanted it before. Only I was unaware of it." I was given my first direct warning that same afternoon. In my rental apartment, a folded piece of paper was tucked under the door. "Go with the past or leave it where it is." Even though I shuddered, I didn't give up. That evening, I returned to the hospital. As soon as I stepped inside, Thaddeus watched me. "Did they not warn you?" I gave a nod. "They have indeed begun." "Then," he replied, "time is running out, not in our favor." He grasped my hand with a force that seemed out of proportion to his frail body. "Listen to me well," he said. "No," I said without hesitation. "If this goes sideways, promise me you won't save me." "Save yourself?" I couldn't identify the passion that filled his eyes as he said, "You already saved yourself once for me. Now we save ourselves together, or we fall together." Your greatest strength and greatest risk were always that tenacity. For the first time in days, I grinned. I realized something brutally clear in that instant. They had placed bets on my vulnerability, my fear, and my quiet. However, I was no longer the housekeeper who thought fate had unfairly punished her. I now understood why they had ruined me, and I was well aware of my adversary. Before we go any further, please share your thoughts about this narrative thus far, and what you would do if you were me in the comments section. You'll get chills from what occurs next, so stay in the video. I came to a firm choice that same evening. I have more in mind than simply clearing Thaddeus's name. I intended to reveal the whole network that had taken both his and my lives, even if following that route meant losing my quiet and my peace of mind as I grew older, even if it meant losing my life, because justice was no longer the only issue. It was about making sure that a man's sacrifice wasn't lost in the trash and cans. and I was prepared to shake those who believed they could manipulate our lives for their own ends. The journalist I had approached consented to meet me in a private cafe far from my home, far from the hospital, and far from anything that would reveal our identities. Only a small folder from the metal box was with me. I couldn't take any chances. He brought a battered notepad in the eyes of someone who has witnessed too many realities and is aware of the cost of speaking them. When we first met, he responded plainly. Tell me why I should risk my life at 70. I opened the folder and showed him only two documents, a bid with forged signatures and an impossible transfer while he was devoid of color. This is dynamite, he whispered. Where did you get this? From a man they forced to disappear to save me. He asked no more questions. He knew the answers didn't fit in that cafe. That same afternoon, I warned Thaddeus that the process had begun. I noticed him paler than ever. The illness was devouring him from the inside with cruel slowness. Then there is no return, he whispered. There never was. That night, while the city slept, the first direct blow arrived. The journalist called me. His voice altered. They ransacked my office, he said. They didn't take anything of value, only files, and someone left a note on my desk. I swallowed hard. What did it say? We only warn once. I felt an ancient cold run down my spine. I knew it with frightening clarity. They were watching us very closely. I decided then to move everything to a place no one would suspect. A small safety deposit box in a provincial bank far from the political circuit. We deposited several encrypted copies of the files there. The journalist kept others in a place he didn't want to reveal to me. I kept a minimal copy as a last safeguard. That same week, a young district attorney agreed to review the material confidentially. We met in his office after night had fallen. He reviewed the names, the figures, the contracts. If this is authentic, he said with a furrowed brow. We are talking about a network that has been operating for more than 20 years. It is authentic, I replied. My life was destroyed to hide it. He looked me in the eyes with a seriousness I won't forget. Then you aren't just looking for personal justice. You are about to touch very powerful people. They touched first. The DA nodded. I'm going to protect this file as if it were my own family. I left there shaking, not from fear, from vertigo. But the enemy didn't sleep. 2 nights later, upon returning to my rental house, I found the door slightly ajar. Everything was turned over, drawers open, photographs scattered on the floor. Nothing of value was missing. Nothing except one thing. My old wedding album. The message was clear. We know who you are. We know who you love. That dawn, I hugged Thaddeus without saying a word. He understood. Now they are going to attack where it hurts most, he whispered. They already did before, I replied. Nothing breaks me like before anymore. But I was lying because the fear for him could indeed break me. Days later came the blow that almost destroyed us completely. That got worse abruptly. High fever, respiratory failure. They transferred him urgently to intensive care. The doctor spoke to me with a harshness I already knew. If he survives the next 48 hours, he'll have a chance. I spent the whole night sitting outside the unit with my gaze fixed on a white wall. I thought that maybe he would never see the guilty fall, that perhaps his sacrifice would remain incomplete. Guilt squeezed my chest like an anvil. At dawn, the DA called me. We are going to execute the first raids today. My heart skipped a beat. So soon. If we wait more, they will destroy everything. They are already trying. The following hours were a slow nightmare. Fragmented news, short calls, simultaneous operations, offices raided, servers seized, respectable businessmen summoned urgently. Mid-afternoon, the journalist sent me a single message. This is going to explode. And it exploded. The first public victims of the network began to fall that same night. A consortium president detained, a fugitive manager, an ex-official, handed over by his own political party to save face. The entire country began to murmur, but the enemy also counterattacked. Leaving the hospital, a man tried to push me into the street with an accident that was too perfect. An orderly saved me, tripping at the right moment and making me fall backward. The car passed by, grazing me. I knew I had no margin for error anymore. That night, I sat next to Thaddeus's bed, still unconscious. I spoke to him as if he could hear me. They can't hide anymore, I told him. Everything is starting to fall. Don't give up now. A silent tear ran down my cheek. At the next dawn, he opened his eyes. Are they still alive? He asked with a voice barely audible. Very alive and very nervous. He tried to smile. Then it was worth it. I took his hand tightly. It's not over yet. 2 days later, the DA summoned me urgently. I entered his office with my heart racing. "We have evidence to go to trial," he said. "Names, money trails, recordings, everything, and the biggest ones." He kept silent for a second. Also, I felt my legs trembling. "Then, is it now or never?" "Exactly." When I left there, I knew the story that had started among trash bags was about to reach its point of no return. We were no longer just two victims. We were the crack through which an entire empire was crumbling. That night, I told Thaddeus, "They are going to fall," I whispered. "All of them." He closed his eyes with a peace I hadn't seen before. "Then, I can go in peace when it's time." "Don't talk like that," I asked him. "Someone has to pay for the silences of the righteous, too," he replied. I understood then that the file hadn't just changed the history of a country. It had changed the destiny of a man who agreed to lose everything so I would keep breathing. And now, for the first time, his truth was about to be written with letters no one could erase. The first name appeared on the news on a Tuesday at dawn. I was sitting next to Thaddeus's bed when the anchor pronounced with a solemn voice the name of a businessman everyone admired. I saw him on the screen in handcuffs, his face covered by a trembling hand. I felt a shudder run through my body. It wasn't joy, it was vertigo. The truth had just crossed the threshold of secrecy to become public. "It started," I whispered. Thaddeus opened his eyes with difficulty and looked at the screen. "I never thought I would live to see this," he said with a threat of a voice. The second and third fell that same day, and there were raids throughout the city, server seizures, and police tape closures of offices. In front of everyone, the network started to fall apart. The same men who had been escorted by authority for years now bowed their heads before the cameras. However, none of that was neat or orderly. There was always a counterattack after a fall. Hospital calls from an unidentified person, unknown individuals lingering longer than required at the door. 2 days later, the DA called me immediately after finding a note that read, "This isn't over yet." Tucked under Thaddeus's wheelchair, he said to me, "We need your formal testimony, not as his ex-wife, but as the primary custodian of the records." A tremendous burden descended over me. "Is it safe?" "At this point, nothing is," he replied. "But without your testimony, some will try to negotiate their exit." I accepted. The day of my statement, the courthouse was surrounded by press. Entering, I felt every look go through me like a dart. Me, a 6-7-year-old woman who for so long was invisible, was now the key piece of a process shaking half the country. Inside the room were them, some with impeccable suits, others with broken dignity. I recognized two of the names Thaddeus had told me in whispers at the hospital. I felt a cold tremor in my hands, but I didn't stop. The DA began to name dates, figures, contracts. Then he called me to the stand. "Do you recognize these documents?" he asked, showing me a folder. "Yes," I replied. "For years, I thought they were the cause of my ruin. Today, I know they were the mechanism of their crime." A murmur ran through the room. "Can you explain how they came into your possession?" I took a deep breath and told everything. The workshop, the buried box, Thaddeus's confession, the evidence, the threats, the persecution. I omitted nothing. Every word was a slab falling on those men who for decades played at moving lives like expendable pieces. One of them stood up suddenly and pointed at me with rage. "This woman is lying," he shouted. "She is manipulated by a criminal." The judge ordered silence. "That woman," he said, looking at everyone severely, "is the reason we are here today. And you gentlemen are the reason she lived with ruin." I felt my knees give way. The DA held my arm so I could sit down. Hours later, when the hearing ended, there were no doubts left. The evidence was overwhelming. Several pretrial detentions were signed that same day. Some tried to negotiate, others declared themselves victims. 2 asked for protection, fearing reprisals. The castle of power was crumbling from within. I returned to the hospital with my heart overflowing. Thaddeus was waiting for me awake. "Did they fall?" "Yes," I said, crying. "They began to fall." He closed his eyes and gave me a painful smile. "Then I can relax a little." "Don't you dare give up now," I said, gripping his hand. "The most crucial thing is still missing." "What is missing?" "Clearing your name," I replied. 3 days later, the news broke that closed the circle. A Heil official, until then untouchable, was detained trying to leave the country with false papers. On his computer, they found direct records of the illegal operations, and among them, Thaddeus's name appeared as the main scapegoat with clear instructions to sustain the fall, to protect the top. The DA came in person to the hospital. Mr. Thaddeus, he said solemnly, officially, you are exonerated of all charges. Your name has been cleared before justice. That means you were the victim of criminal extortion. The DA concluded. Thaddeus looked at me incomprehensibly. And that your sacrifice allowed the dismantling of one of the biggest networks in the country. Thaddeus started to sob silently. I gave him a gentle embrace to avoid hurting him. I muttered, we did it. After all these years, we did it. However, there is always a cost to justice. His condition unexpectedly deteriorated that same early in the morning. Doctors racing, alarms going off, internal bleeding. With my palms pressed to my chest, I remained outside the emergency department, pleading with a God I hadn't dared to approach for years. Hours went by indefinitely. The doctor's expression told it all when he eventually emerged. He whispered, we did what was possible, but his body was in terrible shape. The world seemed to be divided in two. I walked crookedly into the room. There, with his eyes closed, Thaddeus was linked to machines. I walked over and grasped his hand. Up until the very end, you carried the truth with you, I muttered, and everyone is aware of it now. For the final time, he opened his eyes. I shall always remember the affection with which he gazed at me. He hardly stated it was worth it. They will no longer despise you because of me now that you are living. A tear fell silently down his cheek. You were never hated by me. To let him go in peace, I told a falsehood. There was a little smile on his lips as he passed away. The controversy that rocked the nation was far more newsworthy than his death. However, it felt like an earthquake to me. I grieved him in private, away from speeches and cameras, with only myself, his truth, and the burden of all the years that had been robbed. One of the prosecutors came up to me when I buried Thaddeus a few days later. He informed me that there will be a public apology for his case, as well as monetary restitution. I gave him a weary glance. That won't make up for the years he lost, I said. However, it might keep others from losing them. I went back to my residence alone myself that evening. Without strength, I sat on the bed and switched on a little light. The network was down. The guilty were either incarcerated or on the run. Every newspaper published the truth. Justice had come. However, the love that had kept everything going was gone. Nevertheless, I came to a startling realization. I had wanted the truth to stand, not for them to be humiliated. And that retaliation had already been carried out. As though the entire earth were in mourning, the day after the burial began with a gloomy, heavy sky. When I woke up, the silence in my empty house was an absence rather than a threat. I had endured years of living with the cacophony of dread, doubt, and contempt. All of that was now over. And Thaddeus was gone too. I waited for a definite feeling while sitting on the bed and staring at my hands, suffering. There was simply a sluggish and heavy blend of relief and anger. I went for a wandering walk. Indifferent to the man who had lost his life to save me, the city continued to exist. People hurrying, kids heading to school, and sellers yelling deals. Nobody was aware that I had a horrible, silent past beneath my ribcage. No one was aware of the price paid to restore a corrupted name. The district attorney's office called me that same day to wrap up outstanding cases. The DA, a secretary, and a state representative were waiting for me in a solemn room. I declined their offer of coffee. The DA stated, "Ma'am, the case is now officially closed. Every major consequence has been handled. Some have already been found guilty, while others are awaiting sentencing." I silently nodded. I felt a knot in my throat as he went on to say, "The state has determined financial reparation for the damages caused during all these years. There will also be a public act of recognition for the injustice committed against you and your ex-husband." He didn't live to hear those words, I said. The DA looked down and said, "That weighs more than any money." I signed papers with a firm hand that didn't appear to be mine, saying, "We know, and it is a debt that can never be fully settled." I took the compensation for the very straightforward reason that it would give Thaddeus' sacrifice a palpable, real echo and demonstrate that not everything was buried with him. Journalists were waiting for me outside when I left, cameras and microphones in hand, questions pelting my face. "After all of that, how do you feel? How do you feel about the network of corruption? Do you have forgiveness for those who are at fault?" I didn't respond to any. I kept my head high as I strolled among them, silently. Thaddeus had suffered devastation. I was not going to make a show out of his narrative. I was worn out when I got home that evening. A white envelope with no sender was waiting for me on the table. I opened it with a sense of dread that had not really gone away. One handwritten text on a folded sheet was found within. "He prevailed. You did, too." just a tardy acknowledgement from someone who undoubtedly realized there was nothing left to conceal, neither a threat nor animosity. I threw the sheet in the trash after tearing it. My present was no longer allowed to be touched by the past. The scandal's clamor subsided over time. The headlines were filled with news. In the eyes of the public, the old offenders were replaced by new ones. Life continued as usual. However, mine was unique. I purchased a modest, light-filled apartment with a huge window overlooking a park after selling the small house where I had lived during years of poverty. I had no desire for luxury. I wanted to avoid seeming ostentatious. All I wanted was freedom to breathe. A table, 2 seats, my books, and the old pictures that had been saved from the rubble were the few items I set up. One of the pictures showed Thaddeus and myself on our wedding day. After giving it a lot of thought, I made the decision to place it in a plain frame on the dresser, as a memorial to the man who gave his life without my knowledge, rather than to the husband who left me. I began to live a slow life. I discovered how to appreciate the little things, like the sound of kids playing in the plaza, the sun shining through the window, and the hot coffee in the morning. The sense that the world owed me something has been a part of my life for years. I realize now that the only thing it truly owed me was tranquility. The public act took place 1 month after the case was closed. The DA demanded that I go even though I didn't want to. He told me that was for history, not for you. I agreed. They read an official statement in the courthouse's main hall. Thaddeus was identified as a victim of widespread criminal extortion. They acknowledged that his life had been ruined to serve unlawful goals, and that he had been used as a scapegoat. I felt the breath leave my chest when they said his entire name. I was invited to the front. I took my time moving. Silently, the auditorium observed me. I was given a folder containing the final resolution by the DA. He said, "We asked for forgiveness for arriving late." I accepted the folder on behalf of the state. I was unsure of how to respond. For so much harm, and for so much closure, there were not enough words. I was exhausted when I got home that evening. I took a seat beside the open window. The drapes shifted softly in the wind. I reflected on the person I was when Thaddeus vanished, about the anger, shame, hunger, and hatred that sustained me throughout the years, that had not been in vain. I got it. I had arrived at this realization via all of my tears, falls, and unanswered nights. But it had come at a very expensive cost. It stings sometimes to consider what I may have done differently if I had known earlier. Then I realized that's a delusion. They were in charge. He decided to carry the only shield we had. I discovered a little note folded between 2 contracts one day when I was going through the box of last-minute papers. I still had. The handwriting was ancient. It was immediately recognizable to me. Thaddeus was the source. "I'm not here anymore, so if you ever read this, it's because of that. Remember me as the person who loved you despite having to lie to you in order to save you, not as the man who fell. The greatest cost was losing you, but my only triumph was saving you." I sobbed like if I hadn't shed a tear in months. I sobbed without embarrassment, without inhibition, and without pride. I sobbed for what was not possible, and for what he was never able to experience. I eventually figured out how to discuss him without my voice cracking. I discovered how to recount his narrative to anyone who would listen, portraying it as an act of intense love rather than a tragedy. He had been a hero, they informed me. He had simply been a cornered man who decided to save the person he loved. I added, at the age of 67, I made a fresh start, not with youthful fantasies or lofty promises, but with something more difficult and worthwhile, the truth. I move fearlessly now. I no longer search for shadows behind me. I don't wait for surprise attacks anymore. I no longer despise the man who mysteriously vanished one day. I now understand why he did it. I am aware of what he left me. He departed from my life. It was the best gift anyone could have given me, despite the fact that it came with ruin, suffering, and quiet. Because I can now say with peace that I am still here, alive, free, and for the first time in a long time, at peace. Because of his sacrifice. I still find it hard to believe everything I've survived. As I sit by the window of my tiny apartment today and watch life go by, I can hear the kids having fun in the park. I can feel the sun slowly peeking through the curtain, and I'm not scared for the first time in a long time. I don't look behind me anymore. Hearing a commotion at the door no longer makes me shudder. Every cup I put to my lips is no longer questionable. I spent too much time believing that I had been abandoned, that the man I loved had ruined me because he was self-centered, and that his cowardice was the reason for my demise. As it happens, the reverse was true. As it happens, Jesus carried my suffering so I could continue breathing. Unbeknownst to me, he sacrificed his life to save mine. No one will come back to us for the years we lost. Years of humiliation, hunger, quiet, and hatred. For years, I thought I was the only person in the world, and I've come to a startling realization today, even though I was unaware of it at the time. Someone was using his own term to pay for my liberation. No one's fall is anything I celebrate. Seeing them in prison did not make me joyful. Seeing them lose didn't make me feel at ease. When I realized the truth, I found great peace. After his name was cleared and I realized that he had lied to me out of love rather than hate. Even though I don't have much these days, I live quietly. I sleep peacefully. I have no fear when I stroll.